Hello, and welcome to the Asian Impact webinar. I'm Joseph Eglich, the Deputy Director General for ADB's Economic Research and Development Impact Department, and I'll be your moderator today for our session on how government assistance reduces food insecurity. Today's event is building on some research work that my colleagues have published, Food Insecurity, Inflation and Government Aid, Evidence from a Household Survey in Developing Asia. And to present the findings from that work, I have my colleague Dina Azhgaliyeva, Senior Economist from our Economic Research and Development Impact Department. Dina, let me turn the floor over to you for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Joe. It is my great pleasure, and I'm very excited to present our recent research on food security in the two regions of developing Asia using the household survey. That's Caucasus, Central Asia, and Southeast Asia, two big regions of developing Asia. So how this research started, what the motivation of this research? You know, after the COVID-19, there were some issues with food prices, inflation was high, but then after the war in Ukraine, prices went even higher because of energy prices, and also a number of countries started to implement food export bans or some limitations and restrictions, which also increased food prices in developing Asia. And the food insecurity, even before that, already was a big issue in developing Asia. And you can see from the FAO data that around 17% of population of households in these regions, Caucasus, Central Asia, and Southeast Asia, about 17% already had severe or moderate food insecurity. So then from these events, we came to this question, what is the impact of inflation on food insecurity, and particularly who are the vulnerable groups, and what are the coping strategies of households with such situation? So that was the motivation. And if you look at the inflation rates data from ADO, Outlook, and also Food and Agriculture Organization, so the general inflation was really high and increased, especially in 2022. So if you look at the Caucasus and Central Asia left side, you can see in 2022, many countries started to have two-digit inflation rate. So before it was one-digit high, but one-digit inflation rate, right? Like 8-9%. And in 2022, it became two-digit, 15%. You can see in Kazakhstan, for example, and Kyrgyz Republic, 13.9%. Southeast Asia, yes, it's lower. They don't have that many countries, two-digit, but still inflation, you can see increased between 21 and 2022, particularly Lao PDR had 23%. And in 2023 year, you can see slight decline in inflation, but still inflation remained high with two-digit inflation rate in many Central Asian Caucasus countries. And also in Lao PDR as well, became 31%. And I just added today 2024 inflation rates from Asian Development Outlook, April 2025, recently published. You can see, although inflation rate continue to decline now, but still the rates are quite high. Even, for example, Kazakhstan, 8.7% inflation rate, Pakistan, 23.4% inflation rate, and Lao PDR 23% interest rate. Now, the right-hand side shows food inflation. So, you know, general consumer inflation, it includes food, but also other things. So food inflation only measures food price inflation. You can see some countries higher in food price inflation higher than general inflation, and few countries actually it's lower. So it's not necessarily that food price inflation is higher than general inflation. It depends on the country, you can see. But still, the numbers are quite high, and many countries has two digits, especially in Central Asia and Caucasus region. So you can see from this slide that inflation rates were very high, both general inflation and food price inflation in these two regions. Okay, so that was the motivation of the study, the high inflation, and also seeing the food insecurity issues. So we wanted to collect data from household survey, and it was funded by ADB Institute. Data was collected via telephone in order to minimize cost. with questionnaire, and the questionnaire included different questions like about household head characteristics, income, financial circumstances, of course, perceived inflation. What do we think about inflation? Also, food security and coping strategies. Such questions were included. Of course, we want to ask many questions, but we had to fit into a limited time so that household has enough time to answer questions. Because if too long, then they will not want to participate. So overall, it was more than 16,000 households, 7,000, meaning so 1,000 in each country. So 7,000 households, meaning 7 countries, 1,000 each. In Southeast Asia, 7 countries, and 9 countries in Central Asia and Caucasus. So you can see the list of countries here. And each country, roughly 7,000 households were asked by telephone. So the questions, particularly which were asked about food security, included these 6 questions. And each question asks about related to food security questions. For example, the food we bought didn't last enough, we didn't have enough money, or how often you didn't eat enough, or you because not enough money. So such questions asked, and the person asks yes or no. The household head answers yes or no. And for each answer yes, receives 1 point, 1 score, and then all the scores are added. So for household head who answers yes to all 6 questions, the food insecurity index equals to 6. And if household head answers no to all of these questions, then the index equals to 0. So the questions were taken from US Household Food Security Survey, and applied in this study. So the food insecurity index equals 6. That's extreme food insecurity. That's the highest score, means extreme food insecurity. And if it's 0, then it's basically no food insecurity, doesn't exist for that household head. So that's 0. And there is one small thing here, that in Central Asia and Caucasus region, there are 5 questions, not 6. So the highest food insecurity index equals to 5, but in Southeast Asia, the highest food insecurity equals 6. So that's the only small difference in methodology. Otherwise, they had the same questionnaire. So scores, when it's 5 or 6, that's a high food insecurity. And if it's 0, basically no food insecurity. Yeah, now I will show you the graphs with data collected from households. So you can see the vertical axis shows from 0 to 100% of household in each country. What percent of households has each score of the food insecurity. So how many households had 0, how many households had 6, and so on, right? And the last column shows the overall for the region. And you can see each country as well. So on the top graph, you can see Southeast Asia, and the bottom graph is Central Asia and Caucasus region. So as I remind you that the highest score means highest food insecurity, means people are hungry. And when it's 0 means no food insecurity. So if you just look quickly at these 2 graphs, without going to details, you notice that colors for Southeast Asia are bolder, darker, right? While Central Asia, they are more washed colors, right? So what does it mean? It means that Southeast Asia has more extreme values of food insecurity. So they have higher proportion of people, households who has food insecurity extreme values, 0 and 6. While in Central Asia and Caucasus, there are less households with such extreme food insecurity, 0 or 5. So for example, if you look at the dark red color in Southeast Asia, so that's on average like 10% of population has extreme food insecurity. 10% of households has extreme food insecurity, equals 6. But also 25% of household has food insecurity who's 0, 25%. But if you compare with Central Asia and Caucasus, the overall, the last column on the bottom figure, it's nearly 0, those households who has index 5, and also nearly 0, those households who has index 0. So such extreme values like nearly zero in Central Asia. But there are like around 20% of households who have food insecurity index 4 equals 4. So that's the main difference. To summarize, there are more extreme food insecurity in Southeast Asia comparing to Central Asia. Okay, so that's the comparison of Southeast Asia and Central Asia. But also you can see the big differences among countries. You can see that all countries are different. There are some, if you look at Southeast Asia, you can stand out, Lao PDR and Philippines stand out with a greater proportion of households with extreme food insecurity, for example. And in Central Asia and Caucasus, such countries which stand out is Afghanistan, Kyrgyz Republic, and Mongolia, for example. Yeah. So there is differences across the regions, and also there are differences across the countries. So to summarize what I just said from these graphs, we can see big differences across the regions, Southeast Asia and Central Asia, Caucasus. So I repeat that 10% of households reported highest score of food insecurity, and also another 10% reported food insecurity 5 of 5. So there are 20% of households reported 6 of 5 food insecurity, very high numbers. So very high food insecurity. And in Central Asia and Caucasus, only small fraction responded highest score 5, but 20% reported score 4. So in both countries, you can see 20% or approximately of households reported high food insecurity. Also important, of course, determinant for food insecurity is income, right? And we divided here income by quantile, starting from first quantile means lowest income, fourth quantile means highest income group. So the graph goes from lowest income to highest income and food insecurity. So you can see the colors goes like stairs, upstairs for each country. You can see upstairs, upstairs. What it means, the stairs means, upstairs means that the higher the income, the lower food insecurity, which makes sense, right? This is very intuitive. So this is for Southeast Asia, and this is as expected. Very similar picture in Central Asia. Also, you can still see some stairs in the countries. So this means that also the higher the income, the lower food insecurity. So that's also as expected. Now, what's interesting to look at the coping strategies. Okay, so a household had food insecurity issues. How could they cope? So we categorized their coping strategies into 3 groups, using their savings, selling something, selling as coping strategy, and also using applying for government aid. And you can see in both regions, although more households applied coping strategies in Southeast Asia, so you can see the right-hand side taller than the left-hand side, meaning more households used coping strategies. But the ranking of this coping strategy is the same. Number 1 is savings, using savings. Second popular coping strategy is selling. And the third one, applying for government aid. Yeah, so this very similar in the regions, but the only difference that more households used coping strategies in Southeast Asia than in Central Asia, Caucasus. Yeah, so this is the 3 types of coping strategies we consider. Okay, so now let me briefly just go through methodology. We did regression with left-hand side food insecurity index, and the right-hand side all the household characteristics which we can think affect, like income, education level, and of course we included coping strategies. And we also used instrumental variable approach. With probit model. So probit model means what is the probability. So the previous model was the food insecurity score from 0 to 6. Now here, what's the probability that household experience high food insecurity? And similarly included household characteristics like income, education, also coping strategies, and also used instrumental variable. Okay, so here I would like to briefly show the results. Will be 3 slides with results. So let's go one by one. First, as expected, the income group has strong and significant impact on food insecurity. The higher income, the lower will be income insecurity. How can I see that? So the negative sign means negative effect on food insecurity, because remember, our dependent variable is food insecurity. So higher income means lower food insecurity. And this is the negative sign, and also stars means significant. So if there are 3 stars, means the results are significant at 99%. And you can see the higher the income, second quantile, third quantile, fourth quantile. So fourth quantile is the highest income, and the first quantile, the lowest income group, is the reference here. So you can see that the higher income, the higher coefficient, and meaning the lower food insecurity index. So I think this makes sense that the higher income group, they have low food insecurity. Now inflation, perceived inflation. So because we asked households, what do you think about inflation? And their perceived inflations show positive, a positive effect in Southeast Asia, that the higher inflation, the higher food insecurity, which also makes sense. But for Central Asia, somehow the impact was negative. So we can only say for Southeast Asia that it survived the IV as well, because for Central Asia with IV it was not significant. So mainly for Southeast Asia, we found that the high inflation, the higher food insecurity. Now the next result, so financial circumstances play important role. So those households who said that their financial circumstances became worse off, they report higher food insecurity. So again, that makes sense, because if their financial circumstances worse off, then they have food insecurity issues, higher food insecurity. Then for coping strategies, so if you look at the IV results, the last 2 columns. So the first 4 columns, it's a simple OLS, and the last 4 columns with IV. So you can see that the government coping strategy had negative and significant impact on food insecurity, meaning those households who applied for government aid, they had lower food insecurity. Okay, and the next one. So I was also wondering, like, what is it lower food insecurity in rural area or urban area? Because on one side, rural areas, they could have animals and plants to grow, but results show no robust results, impact of location, rural or urban. So there is no significant difference between urban or rural with food insecurity. But we found that particularly in Southeast Asia, when households are not working or less educated, that they have higher food insecurity. But that's only for Southeast Asia. So those who are not working, they have higher food insecurity. When household head is not working, then such families have lower food insecurity. In households which household head is not working, have higher food insecurity. So the impact is positive and significant in Southeast Asia. Okay, so let me summarize key results. What are the most important results which has implications for the policies? So which households are more likely to experience food insecurity? Because we wanted to identify who are the vulnerable groups. So we identified in both regions low income, households who had income decline or financial difficulties, and also larger family size. Those have a higher food insecurity. And also in specific to Southeast Asia, less educated household head or not working household head also has higher food insecurity. So what implication does it have a policy for policies? It means that these groups are particularly vulnerable and might require more support than other groups. We also found that higher inflation or higher food price inflation, also associated with higher food insecurity. So what implication does it have when government anticipate higher inflation or in certain provinces or country overall, meaning that more support will be needed with food security? So because usually there is a forecast for inflation, and some regions could have higher inflations. So the government can use this information that such regions or such times of high inflation, household will need more support with food security. And I think one of the most important, most interesting results, we found that those households who applied for government aid had lower food insecurity. So that means that probably one of the interpretation that probably other measures like using savings or selling things probably were not effective enough with coping with food insecurity, and only the government aid was effective enough to help with food insecurity. But of course, there are some limitations because we know which households applied for government aid, but we don't know if they received it, and how they used this government aid also we don't know. So this doesn't mean that they received this government aid or they used it for food. But we only found that those households who applied for government aid, they had lower food insecurity. So these are the key results. And the working paper version is published, available in free access via this QR code and link. And I highly appreciate all the comments to improve this research. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dina, for your presentation. We do have a technical question here, if I could ask you this question before I turn to the panel. And it was about the food insecurity scores within Cambodia. Do you recall which provinces you did the survey in?
Okay. So the survey is nationally representative. We used government statistics to make them representative across income and across main provinces. And of course, measure cities to make it nationally representative.
Okay, great. Thank you. So thank you very much for the presentation. So let's go ahead and turn to the panel discussion. We've got three panelists today. Elvira Kurmanalieva, Senior Economist from the Carrick Institute. My colleague Michiko Katagami, Principal Natural Resources and Agricultural Specialist from ADB's Agriculture, Food, Nature, and Rural Development Sector Office within our sector group. And Dil Rahut, who's Vice Chair of Research and Senior Research Fellow at the Asian Development Bank Institute in Tokyo. So welcome all of you to today's discussion. I'd like to kick off with a question to Dil. What are critical roles that a government could play in ensuring food security, especially in times of crisis or structural change, such as climate change, economic shocks, or pandemics? Dil?
Thank you, Joe. I think this is very critical questions, particularly like we have encountered two big crises, the war in Ukraine and also the COVID. I think this question is very timely and very relevant. And if you look at government role, actually government can play a very, very critical role and also multifaceted role. It's not about a single role. They have to actually work from multi-dimensional approach they have to adopt. And through this, they can actually help the household in coping with the crisis. And one of the things is that what government could do is that first is to stabilize food supply and market. As Dina highlighted that during the time of shocks, you can see price spiking up, and then government has to really come in and dampen it. To dampen that shock, I think what government could do is to make sure that there is adequate supply of food. And then also they should make sure that the market prices are, managed. They have to provide support prices. Otherwise, it could actually harm the poor and the most vulnerable group. as Dina actually, her research pointed out, the vulnerable groups. So if government fails to stabilize food supply and market, these vulnerable groups actually suffers a lot. And second thing is that that's immediate intervention that government could do. But also, government could also do what you call the creating policies and creating measures so that they can ensure steady supply of food even in time of crisis, like supporting agriculture productions through research and also through scaling technologies that we have. Like for our climate, we have drought tolerant rice, wheat. We have rice, which is like submergent tolerant, saline tolerant. So those kind of scaling those technologies is very, very important. We support production system that we ensure that there is sufficient supply of food during the time of crisis. And the third most important thing that Dina actually in her paper, we have seen that she has pointed it out time and again, is about the vulnerable group. So one of the major role that government can play, particularly in time of crisis, is how do we protect these vulnerable groups? That's providing social safety nets, like food transfers, cash transfers, and school meal program. That can actually help these poor, the most vulnerable group hedge against those shocks. Because richer people are, households are able to manage it. They are able to access food, but the poorer households. So we really need to have targeted intervention. And then the fourth thing is that you need to build resilience. We need to build resilience and preparedness. We don't know when we are going to encounter shocks. Tomorrow we can have floods. Tomorrow we can have droughts. We can have any war, and then we can have, as Dina said, that the motivations behind the paper was the trade embargo, which actually so having preparing the country for those kind of shocks is very, very important. Otherwise, shock comes and then it's very difficult to manage, and mostly the poor and the vulnerable group suffers. So having this in place, but also to make sure that we have cross-sectoral coordination. It's not only the agricultural sectors that has to play a role in this kind of situations. Different sectors have to work really together, the health, the environment, the transportation, because in times of COVID, we had the supply of food, but we couldn't reach the most vulnerable group because we couldn't actually access because of lack of infrastructure. That's why it's very important that we work together. So I think government could play a very important role, and government should. In many countries, we have seen that government has been actually working very actively in agriculture sectors, and we have also seen that ADB has made a commitment to enhance, and support agriculture sector. That itself shows the importance of agriculture sectors and the role that government and other sectors, other international agencies can play in stabilizing food and food security.
Thank you, Dil. That's a very clear view of ways that the government can play a role in terms of ensuring that the worst of food insecurity is not seen, and to try to prevent it from the future. For Michiko, when the COVID-19 pandemic caused food insecurity to spike in Asia, many governments did invest in immediate crisis responses. But looking beyond the emergency, what structural transformations does the region need to ensure more resilient and equitable food and nutrition security?
Okay, Joe, thank you. That's a big question, I know, but this is the very important question that we keep asking ourselves on behalf of the sector group when we structure the specific investment over the medium term to help the DMCs to come up with the food securities the investment. I just want to, in answer to questions, I would like to draw your attention is the structure issues in the first hand. COVID-19 pandemic really changed the trend in terms of reductions in the food insecurity in the world, and particularly in Asia. We've been observing the past 2 decades about this incidence of this hunger and also nutrition insecurity. By the way, this food security usually we consider about the nutrition insecurities as well. And then the incidence of the insecurity had been, it's a nice decline, but it was just stagnant. The speed of reduction was really slow. And then the pandemic came, then it just immediately just shot up in the incidence. Now it's completely following the different trajectory, and it's really worrisome. The structural issues there that we see is the one maybe I'll just highlight two in a very limited time. One is about this inequality. It's prevalent to look at this nutrition insecurity prevalent in Asia. For example, stunting, that is set the proxy for this long-term food insecurity. This is the height for the age. And this is it's on a decline, but it still is at the 20-30% in some of the developing economies. What that means is, the future population of the human development, more than a quarter of them will not fulfill their human development capacity. And those are the people who will face the future and lead those economies to tackle with us a lot of the challenges coming ahead. Also, the inequality for the women's the anemia prevalence in Asia is very, very high, up to 32% or so. That's an Asian average. And that hadn't been changed over the past 10 years at least. And a similar kind of inequalities are happening. So when you look at this, a low birth rate and those content of the food access, not just for the starch, but micronutrients deficiency. This is something very important, things that needs to be addressed. When you look at this, some of the access to food they're limited because of the pandemic, and the structural issues is already there in the first instance. And then that can be really one of the causes that can be explained by the access to the nutritious food, economic access. It's not just about the physical access. Even if it's physically food baskets, a variety of nutritious sort of a food is available in the country, financial access, the cost of the access into those basket foods is very limited because it's too expensive. In Asia, it's about 35% population can't afford to buy the nutrition diets. There's no problem in the energy intake, but the nutrition composition of the intake is a problem. And when you look at the country level estimates, about 50 to 60% of the population cannot afford a healthy diet. That's the latest estimates that we see in many of the countries that we work with. So that's the inequality in terms of the food distribution. That's one structural issue of the present. And looking at the future, that's a famous one that we've been talking about for the decades, is about this feeding challenge. Come 2050, how do we feed that future population in a sustainable manner? Technically, we have to double the food production supply capacity. In order to do so, we would have to look at I think Dil mentioned about the food production phases, but we started looking at maybe a decade ago to invest in the food values chains, food system, we call it, food system approach, because there's a lot of waste in the distribution of this value chain. There is a lot of players, informal and formal players, public and private. We would have to nicely consolidate to minimize the transaction costs, and also the supply capacity will be expanded. So R&D plus collaboration with the value chain partners, including private companies, that's we're more investing. And also that the market system doesn't really incentivize the millions and millions of smallholder farmers that we have in the region. They don't have the market signal, demand signal, because of the value chain disruption already existed before the COVID, and COVID just to make it really worse. So that aggregation and also the restructuring of the value chain, food value chain, is something very important to minimize the waste and then ensure the sustainable use of our natural resources, namely land and the water, and also people. So people are aging. The farming community is really aging. Not many people want to take up the challenge of this farming. Lastly, the climate change kicks in big time. So there's a lot of the supply, the feeding challenge in the long term is the big questions. And so we will have to rely on a lot more of this technology solution that will just transform the productivity in the food system in Asia. So I would just stop here to answer the question. Thank you.
Thanks, Michiko. And you've really highlighted how complex and often subtle the issues are in, not just getting the right amount of calories, but also the right types of nutrients, and then the complex challenges that we might face in the future due to climate change, as well as the long-term damage that children will, the grown children will face from the years of past insecurity. So thank you for that. As turning to Elvira, as we saw in the presentation, both the Caucasus and Central Asia and the Southeast Asia regions face great food insecurity, but their challenges have not been the same, and there's been a lot of variation across countries within these regions. So when we think about the Caucasus and Central Asia, what particular food insecurity issues is this region facing?
Yeah, thank you very much, colleagues, for inviting me to this webinar, especially given that yesterday it was World Hunger Day. It's a privilege for me to participate as a panelist here. So thinking about the peculiarities of the Central Asia and Caucasus region, it actually stems from the geographical position and the climate issues, challenges and the legacy from the former Soviet Union that Central Asia and Caucasus have. So starting from the geography, Central Asia has about 80% of land in Central Asia is desert or semi-arid. And given that the glacier melt and it's actually declining due to the climate change. So another issue is that Central Asia and Caucasus depend on the agriculture mostly depends on the two rivers, Amudarya and Sirdarya, and the conflicts, and we have like upstream countries and downstream countries, and the conflicts and disputes over these two rivers is actually brought about the disruption in the irrigation. And also the Aral Sea crisis has devastated the water access for Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, reducing the arable land. Thinking about the former Soviet Union legacy, there's a collective farm collapses led to fragmented land-holding and low productivity. And this actually also these peculiarities I noticed were kind of highlighted in the results of the research paper that Dina presented. For instance, it's like R² for Central Asia and Caucasus is lower than for Southeast Asia, maybe adding the climate change, fixing for the climate change variables would help to improve the explanatory power. The second peculiarity is the dependence on food import. Out of the 9 countries presented in the paper, about 5 or 6 countries, they have up to from 50% to 90% dependence on imported food. And at the same time, given that the country's governments actually try to target or how to say they impose the food price stabilization measures, and they also provide subsidies from smallholder farmers to boost productivity. They also maintain strategic stocks of staple food, wheat, and sugar and vegetable oil. And this actually helped to control the food prices, and maybe that's why in the paper there was like stronger response on the food prices rather than general prices, because the general prices include also other items, non-food and services items rather than food items. And the third thing that I noticed, like also, this is this rural-urban disparities and income inequality. About up 25 to 40% of rural population in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan live below poverty lines, while some other countries kind of have a much better situation with the poverty. In general, the income inequality is a bit lower in Caucasus and Central Asia. Maybe that's why for this region, the paper found there's like less extreme responses. And also another thing that I noticed that like education response in the education variable insignificance is that because generally education level or access to basic education is high, at up to more than 95% people have access to basic education. Maybe this is why the response, the variables were not significant.
Yeah. Thank you, Elvira. It's appreciate you being able to give some really on the ground insights into the academic study and what might be driving the different results. We've got quite a few questions coming in already in the Q&A. In particular, I have a question here coming from an agriculturalist, Mohammed Rasul Karim from Bangladesh. Now, Bangladesh is not one of the regions that was part of this study, so let me sort of broaden his question. He's looking at, in Bangladesh, if there was any kind of grant fund or food security for rural or urban areas, to help to fight back on food security. And maybe, Michiko, you can give us some insights from some of the ADB support to push back against food insecurity. What types of assistance has been provided by ADB?
In Bangladesh, or this in general, maybe in Bangladesh, we already have a few pipeline investment addressing the food security issues, and that's the one is a national. Actually, we're one of those projects is the project processing team is in country and developing the shape of this what the food security priority investment that government is willing to borrow for. In fact, I think there's a lot of field consultations happening. So maybe we can have I can share that the teams that are contacts, and if you would like to explore a little bit more specific discussion about what is the kind of shape of the opportunities that's going to be available in Bangladesh. But in general, this in Bangladesh and beyond, we do have a corporate target. We had the old corporate target is actually maximize our food security investment, and we just more than doubled it. Meaning to say, I think for ADBs and agriculture sector, and I think Dil highlighted agriculture plus, meaning to get working with this clean water supply and also sanitation, and also the health sector for this primary healthcare. We try to just combine all this multi-sector investments, and also the climate change, and the low carbon transformation and resilience building. So the multi sort of food security engagement, we are expanding to do this. And in fact, we will all ears, and I would like to discuss with many of the stakeholders about what is it that the priority things that you would like to do over the next 10 years time, and then we can reflect that into our investment. How about that?
All right, great. Thank you, Michiko. Dil, let me sort of circle back to this question of how governments have supported. So how do government subsidies in agriculture influence food security outcomes? And what are the potential trade-offs between supporting farmers' incomes and ensuring sustainable, equitable access to food?
Joe, yeah, this is a very tough question. It's $1 million question, I would say. Because if you look at the academic discussions on subsidies, there are a group of people who says that subsidy is bad, we need to remove subsidy. There are a group of people who says subsidy needs to continue. And I myself, being a son of a farmer, having lived in the farm for many, many years, and also working in the farming sectors, agriculture sector for many years, I feel that subsidy is very important, and actually it can influence and shape food and nutritional security through 3 Ps, I would say. One is the productions, Second is the price, and the third is the place, that's access. So by influencing these three domain, subsidy can have a very impactful outcome. So if you look at the positive sides, you can see that subsidy can actually help in enhancing the productions. So how does it enhance the production? It's through input subsidies. If you look at countries like Nepal or any other countries, Bangladesh, where farmers are poor, they cannot afford to buy inputs like fertilizer, pesticides, even machineries, farm machineries. If you look at Nepal, like there has been lots of rural urban migrations, the migrations outside the country. So that has resulted into like shortage of labor. So government has been subsidizing farm machineries. As a result, even the women farmers are able to use small machineries and do farming and continue the farming. So you can see how subsidy can help in enhancing the productions. And second thing is that subsidy can also help in lowering the prices. Otherwise, the prices would go rampant, as Dina highlighted, the inflations, and particularly this inflations in the food will actually hit the poor the most, because poor spend almost about 60, 70, 80% of their income on food. So the moment price goes out of control, they are the one who actually suffers the most. So therefore, the lowering the food, and then the third one is the livelihood support for the farmers. It supports alternate livelihoods and also livelihood within the agriculture system. So it supports that, and also it does what you say is, as I already highlighted, it does what you call the crisis buffering. So during the time of crisis, subsidies, cash transport, social safety net can help these farmers actually sustain. So these are some of the positive aspects you can see, but there are also negative aspects. You can see that the environmental damage. If you subsidize fertilizers and pesticides, there could be overuse and resulting to damage of soil and other things. And also, if you subsidize, let's say, diesels, then the farmer could extract overuse of water resources, resulting into water table depletions or lowering of the water table. And the market distortions, always whenever you provide subsidies, it tend to distort markets, and it also leads to inequity concerns in the sense that if it is not well targeted, if it goes to the wrong, wrongly targeted, then it can also have effect on the equity. And of course, it's going to have a fiscal burden and inefficiency. So these are some of the challenges that you should keep in mind when you actually promote subsidies. But then, we can balance this by actually having targeted subsidies and linking subsidies to conservation agricultures, crop rotations, agroforestry, nexus. So if you try to promote that, because then we can have a double-edged sword. It can help in insulating the farmers from shocks and other things, but also promote technology which is climate mitigating, climate adapting technology. And of course, we need to phase out the harmful subsidies. There are harmful subsidies. We really need to remove subsidies from harmful inputs and put it in things that's actually going to have positive outcome on the environment as well as the income. And of course, last but not least, we need to ensure that it is transparent and there's an accountability. So I would being a son of a farmer, I see subsidy is very, very important. But the thing is that how you actually implement the subsidy plan, that's very important.
Thank you, Dina. And in fact, Elvira, in your comments, you had sort of brought up the legacy of the Soviet collective farming and the transition to the market economy and how that's affected food security. But thinking more generally, considering the unique problems that Caucasus and Central Asia are facing, kind of what are some of the key actions that you would recommend to promote food security, and in particular, what different actions would you need for these countries that are facing different challenges?
Yeah, of course. It's well, the first one maybe is to modernize irrigation system and water management. So the rehabilitation of Soviet-era canals and investment in smart water monitoring. and promoting drought-resistant crops, and expanded drip irrigation would be to reduce the water waste would be important. The supporting agroecology to improve the soil quality, also important. Some climate adaptation measures include the early warning systems for drought and glacier melt impacts, or creating regional climate funds to finance small holder adaptation to the climate change. And of course, it's very important is enhancing the regional trade and supply chain, the boosting intra-regional, intra-industry food trade, and developing the alternative supply routes to mitigate the geopolitical disruption and disputes. Improving the food storage and logistics is also important. So building regional food reserves for emergency stocks, and upgrading transport corridors to reduce food spoilage and costs. The aligning regulations within the Eurasian Economic Union to ease cross-border trade is also the harmonizing the food safety standards. What colleagues mentioned, expanding cash transfer subsidy programs is also very important in Central Asia and Caucasus, targeting food vouchers for vulnerable goods, and subsidizing fertilizers and seeds for small farmers. Improving the infrastructure, especially in rural areas, investing in rural roads and storages and markets to reduce post-harvest losses. The colleagues also mentioned this disparities for women and youth, and supporting these groups is microfinance and training programs for women-led farms, or vocational training in agri-tech to support youth in farming. Fostering regional international cooperation, strengthening the CAREC and Eurasian Economic Union food security policies, having the joint water sharing agreements would help to prevent the disputes and conflicts. And of course, leveraging, investing in research and development is also very important.
And that cooperation angle, I think, is really key to ensuring that some of the vulnerabilities that you had already highlighted in terms of the conflicts of being able to essentially tie everyone's future together to avoid the conflicts, but at the same time also diversifying the ways in which the countries can get their food needs satisfied. Dina, I have a question here that links back to the research, and maybe something to be a bit more forward-looking on where the research comes next. So, given that there's a well-known link between income, government aid, and food security, what's the specific gap or new perspective was the research aiming to address? And building on that, what are some of the areas of future research in this field that you'd like to pursue?
Thank you very much, Joe. And it was very interesting to hear all the panelists, all the interesting topics. So for the future research, one of the reasons I wanted to have a seminar, to have opinion and view on this food insecurity, because this research is ongoing and continuous. Like talking about vulnerable groups, right? Like many women and children affected, right, by food insecurity, because women get pregnant, breastfeeding, and also children. It affects even their education, how often they go to school, how they study, and so on. And so our next paper in pipeline research on the impact of food insecurity on education, because part of this survey, we also asked about children education, about their progress in education. So that also is still ongoing. We're still studying how this food insecurity affected their education, if it had effect or not. So that evidence we are studying right now. Yeah, and maybe, so here many questions panelists also raised, the importance of subsidies, nutrition as well. Michiko-san said about nutrition. Dil mentioned about the importance of subsidies to farms, and Elvira also mentioned some particular specifics to Central Asia and Caucasus. So that's all inspiring for next research. We have farmers in our household survey. So there are many households who are actually farmers. Like this is their family business and they have farms. So that also I would like to study how farmers were affected. And of course, there are lots of subsidy programs. And like Dil said, it's very important how subsidies are implemented. But also I want to see the targeted subsidies. Is it possible to do targeted subsidies, right? Because I think more subsidies, because government expenditure very, very constrained. It's very important to move as targeted as possible to minimize the cost on government expenditure. So such papers started already on farmers and on education, but could be more in the pipeline. Yeah, and so such session really helps with shaping useful policy which will have impact.
Great. Thank you, Dina. And of course, in the annual meeting, the president had announced that ADB would have this really ambitious target for support to food security. So just in terms, turning back to the panelists, I realize we're very close to the hour, but if you could each give me just maybe your final parting thoughts, advice to ADB on how we could, what do we need to prioritize in order to reach those targets, be it knowledge or particular types of interventions. Dil, let me start with you. 1 minute, please.
I would say that ADB should support in scaling those great technology that many research center has actually produced, so that it's accessible to all the farmers.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dil. Elvira, your thoughts, your parting thoughts?
Yeah, I just would like to mention that in the current integrated trade agenda, it includes agricultural trade facilitation as a key component. And it aims to cut the border delays for perishable goods, and maybe the creation of regional food security for in case of crisis, and the joint procurement mechanisms to stabilize prices would be helpful.
Great. All right, thanks a lot, Elvira. And Michiko, since you're going to be part of the team that's going to have to deliver on the promises we've made, what are your parting thoughts in terms of priorities for food security in the future?
Okay, there are many things, but it's one of the things that many of our team members thinks that we should more of is the policy reform, regulatory reform, just in a specific country context. Because it's not just about the partial economy that we're addressing. The entire economies and populations are affected in various ways. And one of the things that is that overall is things that the fundamental enabling environment is lacking for the private sector to come in or to support as a targeted subsidy. I think that the discussion came out in Dina, and also some incentive to conserve the natural resources. Policy in the old sort of legacy policies gets in the way of reducing water use and energies, even if the farmer is willing and convinced to do that. So we can do a lot more of this fundamental policy framework reforms. And actually, we're starting doing this, and we're trying to move them out. And so I may stay tuned, and I would like to work with you, the research team. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Michiko. And thank you to Dina for her presentation, Elvira, Dil, and Michiko for the really interesting discussion. And before we leave today, I'd like to inform everyone about our upcoming webinar. We'd like to invite you to join our next Asian Impact webinar on harnessing digital transformation for good, which will be held on 4 June, Wednesday, 2 to 3 p.m. Manila time via Zoom. Please do check out the Asian Impact webinar page and the Chief Economist's X account for more updates. Thank you, and see you again soon.